Okay, wait, all right.
Okay, I'm going to be talking about the fiscal cliff. How did we get here, and where are we going? I also am going to end it with a concept that really builds on some of the things we talked about before, on the really serious trouble that we are in as a country individually by the amount of obligation that each one of us is bearing for the activities of our government. But let's start at the beginning. The fiscal cliff, what is it? Mostly we know what it is, so I'll just spend a little bit of time going briefly through what it is. It's a whole bunch of tax increases and spending cuts that happen at the end of 2012. December 31st at midnight, all of this happens. The problem is, ordinarily you'd think maybe that's not so bad. Tax increases, spending cuts, that's all going to be good for the budget. The reason people are looking at it as such a horrible thing is that if it puts us into recession, all the good that will come from the higher taxes and from the lower spending will supposedly go for naught because of the reduced economic activity. And it is true, and it's my belief that going off the fiscal cliff is not what we all want. But the problem is, it's a whole lot better than giving in to those people who will just try to increase taxes and not do anything about spending, because the increased taxes side is what's going to hurt the economy, and the cutting spending something, as you'll see from the numbers as I talk, is really going to be what is way out of control. So what is this cliff? The items of the cliff are, one is sequester, which is a combination of about $500 billion of spending cuts coming from Medicare and $500 billion of spending cuts coming from the defense side of the budget. And the reason that they are there, and they're outrageous cuts, but the only reason they're there is because Congress said, look, we'll put them there. That's not what we're going to have. We don't want those spending cuts. We want different spending cuts, but we got to go piece by piece to try to figure out which spending cuts we want. The problem is Congress never did it. It's really the president's fault. It was supposed to be presidential leadership, but nothing ever happened, and so we're stuck with these cuts that nobody ever intended to happen. The problem is, if the cuts have to come from spending from Medicare and from spending, so be it. But they have to be spending cuts. And these have to happen, one way or the other. But that's part of the cliff. The Bush tax cuts are another part of the cliff. That's about it's about $300 billion, about $300 billion a year, of which approximately $80 billion per year come from the top 2% that the president is looking to continue. But the problem is that's only $80 billion out of the $300 billion, and those are the tax cuts that are going to expire at midnight, so it'll be tax increases. And we should stop talking about them as tax cuts. This has been the tax law for 10 years. We're talking about midnight, December 31st, tax increases are coming in for everybody. There's a payroll tax holiday. This is the sickest of them all. A payroll tax holiday was instituted a couple of years ago as a stimulus, a quick shot in the arm. When it didn't work, instead of ending it by saying, okay, it didn't work, let's end it, they said, well, let's leave it for another year or two. And now it's a couple of years down the road, and the administration is saying, hey, you know, now it's going to be a tax cut. It's going to be a tax increase if we take it away. Remember, it's called a holiday. It was supposed to be for 1 year. It's not supposed to be here, and that was a hurt to the deficit that the country never should have never should have done in the first place, and that is it should be over. Unemployment insurance extensions, also a very expensive policy. The longer you allow people to stay on unemployment insurance, the longer it's going to take for them to get a job. There is sympathy for it, but again, it should end. and the AMT patch. The alternative minimum tax, a disaster. I could speak for hours on the AMT alone. The AMT should never have been there. It's just too expensive to just get rid of all at once without total reform of the tax system. But it's a significant item, and if the patch isn't put in, there'll be many, many millions extra of Americans who are paying a lot of extra taxes because of it. So that together is the fiscal cliff. It's put the country in a very precarious, and the word is true, it is precarious tax situation, okay? And let's talk about how did we get here. The way we got here, almost the single reason we're here is because of spending. This country historically has spent about, has had taxes of revenue sources of approximately 18 to 20% in recent years. Years ago it was much lower, but 18 to 20% of GDP. During the Obama administration, from the beginning, from his first year, it bumped up to about 24% of GDP and stayed there. Now the first year was supposed to be a stimulus package. The country was all based on having a stimulus package to get us out of the recession. Well, the recession ended a year into the Obama administration. But somehow or other, because of the structure of the stimulus package, the spending really never went down. The stimulus package should have been just a bunch of one-shot deals that stimulated the economy for a year. Instead, it was institution of programs that once they got started, got their own constituencies, and the spending went from the $2.4 trillion level to the $3.4 trillion level and has not come back down. So the point was, we've had trillion-dollar deficits. Now, historically, we've never had deficits more than $300 or $400 billion a year, and when we had them, they were just for a year or two and they went back. The last Bush year was about $162 billion deficit. Then it goes to Obama, where we're talking about trillions. This is orders of magnitude more than we ever had before. And even if you could justify the first year being $1 trillion deficit for the stimulus, you can't justify it after that. So that was the key. The key was spending out of control. And when I say spending here, I'm talking about out-of-pocket spending. I'm talking about putting things on a credit card. I'm not talking about entitlements. Entitlements have also grown during the period. But entitlements, if spending and if being profligate spending-wise is the case of a really bad flu, then entitlements is a cancer. Why? Because it doesn't hurt you today. You may not even know that you have it. But it will be devastating in the future. And that's the problem. That's the problem with entitlements. Let me talk a little bit about how insidious it is. We actually have, in addition to the president, we have the leader of the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, and the head of the Budget Committee for the Senate, Dick Durbin, have both said Social Security doesn't have a problem because the amount that's coming in and coming out this year isn't so different. The problem is the people earning Social Security benefits this year, and the people earning Social Security benefits this year are earning benefits in the future. And so we're incurring promises to pay this year that are huge. In fact, I have the number for the total promises to pay this year alone. The excess of the amount of promises we're making for future Social Security and Medicare benefits, in excess of what we're taking from people. So people are paying. We get Medicare taxes, we get Social Security taxes from people. So we're getting X number of dollars, but what we're promising to pay them for the dollars that we're getting is $7 trillion more. $7 trillion more. That's approximately the income, the adjusted gross income of every man, woman, and child in this country. Those are the promises we're making this year. So we are promising other people as much money in the future as everything that we've made this year. Obviously, we don't even have everything we've made. We've had to spend some of it to live. So this is totally ridiculous and unsustainable. But it's not only been Social Security and Medicare, it's also been food stamps. Disability has gone out of control as people haven't had their jobs. They've been able to find judges that will allow them to collect disability payments instead of going out and working. It's a nightmare, but that's the way it is. Healthcare has also been a terrible problem. Obamacare is going to end up costing at least $1 trillion over 10 years. In fact, it was supposed to be it was supposed to be $100 billion net plus to our budget over 10 years, but that's before people started realizing that some of the things in Obamacare were absolutely undoable. And that when you take those into consideration, there's a deficit. The other thing that was interesting about it is that there is a deficit. The Obamacare has over $1 trillion in taxes. So people thought that Obamacare wasn't going to cost anything. But in truth, Obamacare is costing, even by the federal government, by any tally, the federal government has said that Obamacare is costing over $1 trillion. The reason they were able to say it wasn't going to negatively impact the benefit, the debt, is because there was over $1 trillion in taxes that were included in Obamacare. And we can talk about it. There's the health insurance. There's the health insurance taxes on the health insurance industries, which you're only going to see in higher insurance premiums. There's the taxes on medical devices, which is the most outrageous thing. We have Obamacare. It's supposed to reduce the cost of medical care, but yet there's a tax on every medical device that's being created. Absolutely ludicrous. There's a surtax on investment income for high income earners of 3.8%. It's a huge increase because it's this is a tax directly on investment income. It'll be on the strength of the economy. There's a hike in the Medicare payroll tax of 0.9% for high-income earners. Again, this directly is going to impact the amount of investment there's able to be. And there's also, in effect, a reduction of what you're able to deduct for your medical expenses by raising the floor from 7.5% to 10%. So healthcare has been another big contributor to the fiscal problems that we are having. And all of this is on top of the biggest tax, probably, that has happened is the one that's not even called a tax, and it's the regulatory explosion. I mean, we've all heard of what the EPA is doing. The EPA has effectively eliminated coal, which is the cheapest source of energy we have in this country. It has basically made new coal plants or improvements in old coal plants illegal. How did they do it? Only a government could do this. By figuring out a level of mercury that coal plants can't come in under. It has nothing to do with injury because there's mercury everywhere, but they came up with a level of mercury that coal plants were not allowed to emit, which basically, so they didn't say, they'll swear that they didn't close down the coal plants, but their regulations absolutely did. What effect is it going to be? Energy is going to be more costly. I mean, I'm not a spokesman for the coal industry, but people are going to pay more. Why? Because utilities are going to have to pay more now for their energy. Utilities are regulated. They'll be able to charge more to the customers because their costs are going up. So you've got the EPA, you've got the National Labor Relations Board, we all know the Boeing stories. Hopefully some of the things like what's going on in Michigan are going to help a little bit. Hopefully the country will get a little bit more on board that the labor situation in this country must be made more transparent. But as long as as long as Obama is in control, the NLRB is going to be controlled by those people who are interested in union union growth, which is exactly the same as reduced productivity and more expenses for the taxpayers. So this is like a very substantial additional tax. The Food and Drug Administration, the Internal Revenue Service, everybody else has got regulations going through the roof. So it's going to be, and that is effectively a tax. If you need to hire more people in your company to interpret the regulations, that means the cost of all your products are going up. Oh, and by the way, there is a group of people that don't have to pay this regulatory burden. You know who that is? Those are the people who are making our products, but making it abroad. They don't have to worry about all this stuff. So they could make cheaper products, making it more difficult for our own companies in this country to compete. So effectively, it is absolutely fair to say that Obama's regulatory policies are more responsible for sending jobs overseas than anything that anybody on the conservative side of the aisle could even dream of doing. Where do we go from here? What do we do to try to fix this? It's really tough, although the fact that the Republicans have the House hopefully can prevent more bad from being done. Most of the real bad stuff happened during the 2 years that Obama had control of everything. Now that that's gone, the House has done a pretty decent job of being able to control control the situation from getting worse. But it is horrific, as you'll see in just a few moments. But what do we need to do? We need to cut spending. By the way, there's something outrageously going on in the dialogue right now. Everybody's now talking about, let's see, should it be $1 of spending, $1 of taxes for $3 of spending, $2.50 of spending, $2 of spending, $10 of spending? Well, the truth is, when we just raised spending in the last 4 years, each year, by $1 trillion a year, before we start talking of 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, let's get rid of that $1 trillion of spending first. And so even if you did want to talk to a ratio between spending and revenue increases and tax increases, first get rid of the spending. It's like, you know, you're going to have a fight. The first guy takes a sucker punch to the other guy and says, okay, now we start off even. Well, wait a minute, you know, you got to get back to the even playing field first. Get the $1 trillion of spending that was just thrown in, stimulus and its progeny, get rid of them, then we'll start talking about the possibilities of revenue. I haven't heard that, I don't know why, but that should be where we're coming from. Tax reform is critical. There are a lot of deductions in the code that are there for reasons that are really special to industries. It is true, people love their mortgage interest deduction, real estate taxes, and that sort of thing. But they really have nothing to do with fairness of taxes. They do have to do with incentive to industries. People can argue that good real estate prices are good for people. Well, you can argue that anything is good for people. You can argue that people renting something better than staying in their parents' houses is good, so we should give credits for renters too. The truth is, by all that's fair and rational, it should just be a tax. You should be able to do with your money what you want, but there should be a tax on the amount of income that you earn, and if we do that, rates could be much lower for everybody.
Fair tax, not flat.
Flat. Every dollar should be taxed the same rate no matter how rich or poor you are.
That's a different story for another day. I'm happy to deal with that another time. I happen to, just to talk about that for a second, although I don't disagree that fair tax is a rational alternative to the income tax, the problem is mechanical. You can't get there from here. Well, I'll talk about it another time, but the problem is that if you have a fair, any sort of consumption tax and an income tax at the same time, we're instantaneously Europe. But as a practical matter, to switch over and to end one and then immediately start up another one, the practical problems are virtually insurmountable. I haven't heard anybody talk to how they're going to overcome that. When I hear that, I'm ready to talk again. but staying on topic. Entitlement reform is the biggest thing, and unfortunately, there's only one way to do it. Sadly, but revenue is out of the picture, and you'll see this in just a minute. The discussion of having revenue be a potential contributor to saving the entitlements is ludicrous from the get-go. Absolutely ludicrous from the get-go, because the order of magnitude is insane. The only way to solve the entitlement issue is to cut entitlements. It's going to have to be, and there's all sorts of reasons why it should be. Ages have to go up, inflation increases have to be stuck with inflation increases and not more. And that's the way to deal with Social Security. And on the health side, it's going to have to be some sort of system where people pay for their own things. Obamacare and the left orientations towards health care is always give it to everybody for free, because God forbid somebody will have to pay for a mammogram, they won't get it, then they're going to die of breast cancer. Well, you know what? People are not so stupid. If people paid for their own mammograms, if people who didn't have enough money would have to be subsidized, then that's fine. But people know they need the mammograms, and if they have to find the cheapest, most reasonably priced mammogram, they will find it, instead of now having everybody do the same thing and the people giving the mammograms having no price competition. It's nuts. But we have to go in the opposite direction. It'll be more of a Ryan-type plan, but it has to come out of it. Revenue as a reason, as a method to cure entitlements is absolutely a non-starter. And on the regulation side, my favorite thing is no regulation for more than some modest amount of money can go into effect without clearing Congress. And let Congress put its neck out to approve some of these things. It wouldn't be done. Regulations would slow. I want to take my remaining time to take a look at what everybody has. Everybody has our own budget. We have income coming into our household, we got expenses going out, we have future obligations to pay. But in addition to what we all have our share of what the government's doing. So all I've done is I've taken the government and I've said, okay, I'm going to take it as a family of three. I don't know how big everybody's families are. Family of three, 2 parents and a kid, a single parent with 2 kids. Whatever you got, and it's expandable. You want to multiply it by 1 1/3 to have a family of 4. You want to divide it by, take off 1/3, have a family of 2. I'm going to give you for a family of 3. So for every family of 3, in addition to your own stuff, here's the stuff that you got for your share of what our friendly government is doing for us.
I don't want to know.
The good news is that you got $25,000 of income coming in on your behalf. You got $25,000 of income. That's really nice. Unfortunately, your money going out is $38,000. So the government expenditures in the current environment, $38,000 a year. All that is taking federal expenditures, dividing it by the 314 million to get a per person amount, and then multiplying it by 3 for 3 people. So $25,000 of income. $38,000 of expenses. But you know, there's a problem. The problem is, in addition to the money coming in and the money going out, we, as our share of the government, has made promises to other people for things we have to do for them in the future. So for this year alone, that we took in $25,000 and spent $38,000, we have made promises to do $67,000 a year of future entitlements for our children and grandchildren, well, just for the work that was done this year. So all of the people earning Social Security benefits this year because they're working, all the people earning Medicare benefits this year because they're working, if you take the promises that they're made, which are hugely more than what they're paying in, but the excess of the promises that we're doing, minus the money we're taking in, is $67,000 for a family of 3, or basically what we're saying is $22,000 plus for every man, woman, and child. So you have $25,000 of income, $38,000 of expenses, $67,000 of future unfunded promises.
So you have
Okay.
a couple more minutes.
Okay, so I'll just finish up. So that's a huge amount. But one thing I didn't tell you, when you started the year, you weren't even. You had some debt, your family of 3. And you can think about it if you want to bring another child into this country. This family of 3, when the year began, had $156,000 of debt. The federal $16 trillion deficit, divided by 314 million people, is about $52,000 a year. So for your family of 3, you owe $156,000. Let's throw on the Medicare, and that's just what you owe for money that you've already spent, money that we owe to people who we borrowed money for, okay? What about Social Security? Well, our Social Security, the amount of money that we owe, not for the work that was done this year, but for the work that was done in past years, which we've promised to pay people for in the future, that's $196,000. And the promises we paid for future medical care for our people is $409,000. A total debt for your family of 3 of $761,000. And remember, you know, we're a smart group here, so we understand the difference between annual deficits and cumulative amounts that we owe. So I said we're running a deficit of about $80,000 a year, our little family of 3. And we're already owing $761,000, with Obama being in office for another 3 years, running $1 trillion a year deficits, which he's got no concepts to reduce. $80,000 a year for 3 more years, $240,000, we make the magic million. So just know that within 3 years, for our family of 3, we will owe $1 million. $1 million. And by the way, I'll end with this final piece of wonderful information. So a deficit of $13,000 a year cash for the government, $67,000 of unfunded promises to pay, $80,000 a year deficit. The president's way of solving this is for tax increases on the wealthy. And how much is that going to help us each year? $764. $764 against the $80,000. And by the way, of the way to eat into the $80,000, that $764 is about the only way you can do it that puts your revenue, which is the only positive number I talked about all day,